Hi, AP Bio. This is Miss Biggerstaff, and our notes on biomolecules, biochemistry, organic chemistry. So, just in case you do not know to this point, organic means that something contains carbon. That is the definition of it. All food then technically is organic. So what happens is that we have a science word that ends up being used for other purposes. So yes, we use organic for lots of other things now, but the definition is that it contains carbon. Chemically wise, that's important, is that carbon likes to make 4 bonds, which means that it can make very stable molecules. And for us biologists, then it all comes down to shape. Shape is going to tell us how a molecule behaves, how it acts, what it's doing. And so molecules that have similar shapes are going to do or have similar effects. So this picture here is showing a membrane. I'm going to give you a moment to see if you can pick out the membrane. The membrane is going to be where this yellow line is. Purple dots, purple blobs, almost always represent proteins. So I'm starting you off already figuring out how to interpret pictures. One of the tricks the AP Bio exam world loves to do is to make things look much more complicated than they actually are. All right, so we can break things down into 4 main groups of molecules. You'll notice on this slide that most of these molecules should be things you're familiar with. Carbs, lipids. Oh, wait, that's just a fat. Protein, nucleic acid. So those things didn't go away. We're just now going to look at them in a more detailed way. So these guys can also form giant molecules or macromolecules. So they can be small or they can be big. Carbohydrates, yes, we do use them for energy. Yes, we will come back to carbohydrates, especially when we talk about ATP. If you don't know about ATP yet, you will. So, our bodies tend to use small molecules to make ATP or energy. Monosaccharide is the one on the right-hand side over here. This is just a molecule. I think it's a glucose molecule. And so it has mono meaning one. Saccharide just means sugar. The polysaccharide then has a few connected together. As you get larger, then you get into larger carbohydrates, and you can keep adding and building. So we have this for carbohydrates, but there is another main component of carbohydrate usage, and that is for communication. So notice again, here's a big picture. This is actually a picture of a membrane. We will be looking at cell membranes or plasma membranes a lot, but there is a carbohydrate here. So look at it for a moment, see if you can find the carbohydrate. It is actually called on here an oligosaccharide. Again, AP Bio world and the biology world loves to make things look more complicated than they are. So saccharide just means sugar. So the oligosaccharide is just going to be the carbohydrate that is coming out. Why is this important though? How can molecules actually communicate? Can a cell talk? I know you're all sitting here going, no. Can a cell even hear? I could not play this video back to a cell. It's not going to know what the heck is going on. I cannot talk to a cell. The only way that cells can communicate is through touch, physical contact. In distance learning, we'd all be in trouble. So in order to communicate, they have to have different shapes so that they can come in contact with each other. Those carbohydrates, especially on the exterior of cells, which is the top of this picture, those play a huge role in allowing cells to communicate with each other. Now, this picture is also going to be here for lipids. So notice the same picture on the right-hand side, just because we tend to think of lipids with food as fats. The definition of a lipid is just that they are hydrophobic. They do not like water. Literally, hydrophobic means fear of water. If you've taken chemistry recently, the chemistry term for that is nonpolar. Biologists like to have their own names. Chemists like to have their own names. So hydrophobic and nonpolar. The image on the left-hand side of the screen is actually of a phospholipid. That's what makes up our membranes, and those are the ones we will be using the most and seeing the most in AP biology. So remember, the structure is going to determine how it acts, how its function is. So the middle of this membrane and the little tails sticking out of the phospholipid, part B on this image, don't like water. So now if I'm a molecule that does like water and I hit that section, I'm not going to want to go past it because they don't like water. It's as simple as that. It's like hitting a wall made out of liquid. You also notice on this image, it's slightly different. There are some red blobs. Now they're labeled on here, but anytime you see a blob or glob, in this case, globular, those are going to be proteins, which we will come to on the next slide. But the phospholipids, we will also come back to with cell membranes. You will notice that in part 1 and 2, if you can see inside there, there's a phosphate group, a little phosphate. We've actually already mentioned phosphates once in this slide series because I mentioned ATP. The P stands for phosphate. All right, proteins. You need to retrain your brain right now. When you hear the word protein, I want you from now on to think that it's going to run a body. It can run your body. It can run a dog's body. It can run a cow's body. It can run the plant's body. It doesn't matter what. Proteins are the doers. So yes, oftentimes when you Google protein, this is what comes up. You have a hamburger. I don't care. That's great. It contains proteins, but that's not the definition of protein anymore. Proteins are doers. We don't necessarily want just the hamburger. So the question then becomes, how does that hamburger get broken down to make a protein? How do all these proteins run our bodies? Simple question, simple answer is that proteins are made out of these cool molecules called amino acids. We'll come back to this. Don't worry. We'll spend some time on this. We'll actually spend lots of time on this. You just want to get your head around the idea that there are 20 different amino acids. The picture on the right is actually all of the different amino acids. They have the same structure. You can Google that. I'll show you some pictures later. But proteins are just a combination of amino acids. That's what transcription translation, protein synthesis is linking all these amino acids together. But then you can get, instead of just one or two, you get thousands of amino acids binding together to form proteins. To make sure that that sinks in with an analogy, how do we get so many different combination of amino acids? Simple analogy, if I give everyone a box of crayons or the same amount of crayons that all have the same color and I asked you to draw a picture, you might start with the same number, same colors, but we're all going to end up making different pictures. Some people might only use one color. Some people might make a giant mural. Some people might make a very small mark on the page and say they're done. Okay, so even though we're only using amino acids, again, the structure is going to tell us how those amino acids end up behaving. Lastly, but definitely not least of the organic molecules are the nucleic acids. Oftentimes now we can just say nucleotides. These tend to get interchanged. These are the basics of DNA and RNA. The bottom of the slide, you will see the breakdown of a nucleotide. If you take in bio, here should be your review. A nucleotide is just a sugar, a phosphate, a base. A sugar, a phosphate, a base. I could repeat that all day long, and that would make up our DNA or our RNA nucleic acids. Notice too, phosphates showing back up. So phosphates tend to be a type of a part of an organic molecule that we tend to take for granted when we are first learning biology, but they're very important and they show up in a lot of different things. So again, we'll come back to DNA and RNA. No, the structure has not changed for them, and we will go into these molecules in more detail in some further notes and slides.